Hello, everyone. My name is Nakona Robinson, and I decided to do my professional development on relatable reading, how to make reading less schoolish. As we were going through the semester, and I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do my assignment on, this one really stuck out to me when we were reading Smith and Wilhelm's book. I became interested in this because I taught reading my first year teaching and I really struggled with it. And I wanted to include and inspire people to maybe get a little more creative with teaching reading. So some of the problems that I saw and that I know multiple people see when we're teaching reading is that many students are disengaged from their reading. So when we do an assignment, they don't seem interested or seem to care about what we're doing. We also see that a lot of students view reading as schoolish, and there's a lot of research to support this, especially in the book by Smith and Wilhelm. Boys often didn't really connect the reading they were doing in school with anything they were doing outside of class, and that was a problem for them. They saw reading as being schoolish. I think a lot of students also ask, when will we use this? So they're viewing it as being schoolish and they don't understand, we're reading Romeo and Juliet. When will I be able to use this again in my life? And I think that really fosters disengagement with them, and they really are like, oh, I'm never going to need this again. Why should I care? That kind of ties in right into the next point. What they're reading doesn't mean anything to them. So that's one of our challenges as teachers, is being able to make the reading mean something. The last point that I have here for many problems that we are seeing is that many students are below proficient in reading. And why is that? A lot of them don't necessarily lack the skills that they need, but they lack the motivation or the desire to actually put in an effort with their reading. And so that's showing that some of them are going to be below proficient when they're actually not. So some different things that we can do, that's what I did my research on. And I found some really excellent things. But mostly I want to focus on 3 different ways that we can help solve these problems. The problems of disengagement, the problems of being below proficient even though they shouldn't be. And those 3 things are here on the next slide. So throughout my research, I found 3 main things that we can do to make reading seem less schoolish. The first one is to make reading more culturally significant. And I'm going to go through lots of examples here over the course of the next few slides. The second one is to relate reading to something that they already know. And the third one is to include topics that they are interested in. So this quote I thought was really important and kind of embodied my whole desire to do this project. It says, if teachers can become aware of who their students really are and what motivates them to read and write, and learning how adolescents develop, practice, and refine their literacies outside of school, educators will be better equipped to connect those out-of-school literacy practices to the work students do in school. Love this quote, and I really wanted to focus on this and those 3 main things that we can do to help school and reading seem less schoolish. So the first one is making reading culturally significant. So if I was actually doing this professional development like in person, I'd ask just around for some suggestions and to see what the crowd kind of thought already. So some of the research that I found from Alverman She declares that, like I kind of touched on before, struggling readers don't necessarily lack the development of the skills they need to be a good reader, but they have actually lacked the access to culturally relevant resources. They need something that means something to them, and it is our job to find it. So if we're making these sources more culturally relevant, more of our students will be able to connect with the material. So an example that I found in one of the studies, the study done by Alverman, actually, she had a great example of a woman named Mrs. Minerva. She was a teacher, I believe, in Texas, and her school was consistently scoring really low on standardized state testing in reading, math, and in English. And so Mrs. Minerva was worried about them losing their accreditation. And so what she did was begin to pull those cultural aspects into her teaching. So one thing that she did is she kind of started gathering the different beliefs of her students. Some were like religious beliefs, others were cultural beliefs, and she started incorporating those into the classroom. They discussed one specific student's beliefs about like herbal remedies and how they can heal. And so they did an assignment about that. So they did a reading about that. And then she took them on a field trip to go to that student's garden where she had all of these like herbs and different things that she believed would help heal people. And so the students actually got to physically see a lot of the beliefs that she was talking about, and the student could actually like discuss with this other students this even more. And the students seemed to have a really increased interest in the readings that they were doing that were related to this. It's because they got to see one of their students' cultural lives and then be able to incorporate it into all these other readings. And so Mrs. Minerva focused on a bunch of different cultures, and they all got to learn about each other. So it was not only relevant to like their beliefs, but they got to learn what different people in their class believed as well. And Alverman never provided any of the results of Mrs. Minerva's experiment, but she did note that the interest in her students' reading was significantly higher than it had been previous to her including all of these cultures. Another way to make reading more culturally significant was discussed by Balmer and Scarrett in their 2011 study. Students often use literacy outside of school to express their cultural identity and things about them. So we, as teachers, should be able to find how they're expressing their cultural identity and be able to bring that into the classroom. This can help make learning and reading more meaningful and kind of tie it into their beliefs again. An example that I found here in Balmer and Scarrett, their study, was the example of a teacher who assigned a heart map. Now, each student got a heart, and within that heart, they had to write down a bunch of things that they loved. And so each student probably wrote down 8 to 10 things. And then they had to pick one that they knew they could write a lot about. And then the teacher assigned an assignment incorporating that specific thing that they loved. And so they had to do a writing about it. And this is definitely an assignment that can be super meaningful and relatable. They're talking about something that they love, so they should be able to find not only a lot of information on it, but it should also touch them and make them want to do the assignment. The second thing that I wanted to focus on here was making reading relatable. This I don't think this is a hard thing to do, especially if you're supposed to incorporate like different articles and different types of reading into your classes. So making it relatable is something I believe teachers should be able to do easily. Now, there was a lot of sources that discuss the importance of schema theory, so making it relatable is really tying into that. So people store information in what is known as schema or a mental representation. So it's easier for a student to learn something if they can connect it to something they already know. Pretty simple. So I wanted to use the example of front loading here. Front loading is when you access a student's prior knowledge about the content or something they already know. So when I taught reading that first year, I assigned a book called The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. Really great book. I'd recommend it for anybody who's thinking about teaching like middle school reading. When I taught the book, I really wanted to front load and like focus on the emotions that students had already felt. The Outsiders focuses on different themes like judgment, rivalry, socioeconomic differences, and so I wanted to show students that and have them think about those things within their own lives. So what I did to hopefully achieve that, I created a PowerPoint with different pictures of people on every slide. And they would be like maybe someone who we typically say would be like a goth or a jock, or maybe one was a nerd. The students had 10 seconds for each slide to write down their initial thoughts about everything, about that person on that slide. And afterwards, when the slideshow is over, we discuss some of their judgments and prejudices and kind of tied that into how The Outsiders has a lot of prejudice in it, how it's typically lower socioeconomic students are judged differently than higher socioeconomic students, which is one of the big themes. So I wanted to focus on that for it. Another example of front loading could simply be asking students what they already know about it. Maybe making a KWL chart. I know this, I want to know this, and then after you've done something, it's what they learned. That would be a great way to show front loading. More on relatable reading. The activity where knowledge is acquired cannot be separated from learning. So it's really difficult for us to be teaching things that have no relevance to anyone's life because they need to have like an activity or something that goes with it to enhance it. Students need to connect what they're learning to a situation in which it could be used. If they can't connect that, it's going to be harder for them to hold on to that information. Learning vocabulary can be hard because it's often taken out of context. So many times people have them write down the vocab, and then what do they have to do? They have to memorize it. That is so hard, and that is not the natural way that we learn vocabulary. Naturally, we can learn just being in a conversation, learn so much more vocabulary than you can by memorizing it. And that's how we learn most of the time. So taking it out of context can be really hard. So for this slide on relatable reading, I wanted to use the example of the boy named Grady. So this was also a study. Grady was in a study by Alverman. He was kind of the main focus of her study. And she decided to create a media club to learn about students' literacies. So this was kind of just an extra thing that students could do and come in. And there was no pressure. Nobody was forced to read. Alverman wanted to find out what students would read and why they were going to read them. So Grady was a boy who had absolutely no desire to read. He didn't want to read anything. So every time he came into media club, he would get on his Game Boy and play this game called Metal Gear. And then one day, Alverman noticed, after like a week of him playing this game, noticed that he seemed bored and wasn't really interested in the game. And so she struck a conversation with him, and he's like, well, the game's getting boring. I can't pass this one level, and I'm just kind of sick of it. And so she suggested to him that he read the magazines that they had on hand that would teach him the cheat codes. And so the cheat codes would help him pass that level. And all of a sudden, he was so interested in reading that book about, or the magazine about the cheat codes. And so she found out later that he also liked Pokemon. And so she recommended a book about Pokemon moves and the different powers that the Pokemon have. I think it's powers. And he read that book like front to back and just loved it. So relating something to something they already do is super important to get them engaged and interested in the reading. The last slide here about relatable reading is just discussing the study of Balmer and Scarrett. Types of literacy students read outside of school are much more related to a student's interests and what they desire to learn. And so I use the example of magazines and car manuals. So girls, for example, might be super interested in makeup at the time. They're going to read the magazine and all of these tips about how to apply your makeup, what makeup's the best, what you shouldn't use, different styles that you can do. And what they're going to do with it is actually use that information. So they're going to go buy the makeup that they want. They're going to apply it in the way that the magazine says. And then they're being rewarded by their friends at school, maybe in someone who's like, oh my gosh, your makeup looks so good today, or I really like the way you did your eyeshadow. So girls are using magazines, specifically the makeup, to be rewarded, essentially. It's part of their interest. It's what they want to learn, so they're learning about it. In the example of a car manual, this can be for boys or girls, but oftentimes boys are going to be interested in their car, or maybe they just got an older car from their parents and they have some things that they want to fix up on it. And so they're going to read that to learn how to fix something. So they have a purpose for reading it. It's also involving something that they're interested in. Oh, I guess there's one more slide on relatable reading. So from a study by Zerbs way back in 1929, they're discussing the idea that students need to engage in purposeful reading that can initiate further activities. So instead of like it being like relatable to their interests, it should be relatable to something they could do later. So for example, this teacher named Sandra Tolar, she was an English teacher. She would assign an extra reading each week, and those readings would be just random things like magazine articles, car ads, recipes, do-it-yourself posts, blogs, the side of a cereal box. In her article about this, she discussed that students were super excited to discuss them and loved finding which one they were going to use that week and then talking about it in class. So how I'm relating this to initiating further activities, if it's a recipe they're looking at, maybe they're like, this recipe sounds super good. Maybe I should go cook it at home later tonight. Or if it's a do-it-yourself post about how to create Christmas ornaments, maybe they're going to go read about that and then go through the process of actually creating those ornaments. The last topic that is really important in a way that we can make reading seem less schoolish is by including interesting topics for students. So Smith and Wilhelm, in their book from 2002, they shared some of the things that the boys they were interacting with and studying wanted. Most of the boys said that they wanted to enjoy what they were learning in the moment. And then they also discussed that they don't necessarily care if they can use it in the future. They want it to be relatable now, that instinct where they need to be reassured in this moment. So some examples is just like bringing in something that students are interested in. So I think a big part of this, you have to learn what your students are interested in. So maybe at the beginning of the year, like send out like a survey or something, say, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself. Do you like doing these types of things? Do you not like doing these types of things? So you can look back on that and find maybe some books or some articles or something that they can relate to something they're interested in and read about. For example, if you have to assign some type of book report, make them be able to do it on a book that they're interested in. So if they have to do like maybe for history or something, they have to do some type of historical figure and they have to read a short book on it, let them choose the historical figure that they want to do. It's really important for them to be able to be interested in what they are reading. So if I was like physically giving this professional development, the activity that I would want to do with the rest of the teachers probably take about 10 minutes. I'd give them 10 minutes and allow them to work in groups of 3 or 4. So I have student profiles printed off, and each group would get one of the 3 student profiles. The goal for them to do would be to research and find some literature that they could incorporate into a lesson that was culturally relevant, relatable, or interesting to that particular student. So the next 3 slides are going to show those different profiles, and I want you guys to take a look at those. So student profile number 1, her name is Andrea, age 13. She loves to go skiing and snowboarding in the winter, and her parents have a cabin up in Big Sky. She has 2 dogs, a husky and a collie. She is currently obsessed with makeup trends and loves to wear new styles to school. She previously lived in Stillwater, Minnesota. So I did a little research myself on like each student profile to see if I could find some things that I could incorporate into a reading class that would be relevant to these students. So for Andrea, I found a really awesome article on the Paralympic gold medalist Evan Strong. And so that would be something that was really relatable to her because he is a medalist in skiing or snowboarding at the Winter Olympics. And so if they're doing like current events or something like that, that would be a really good article to incorporate. Another thing that I found was a book called Face Paint, The Story of Makeup. And so I think as I was reading the reviews, it was about how makeup came to be, kind of the history of makeup, and like current trends and things like that, and what led to those trends. So for her, being totally obsessed with makeup trends and liking to wear new styles, I think that would fit right in with her profile and be something that she could really relate to and get interested in. And the final one that I found was actually a history of Stillwater, Minnesota. So moving to a new place is often, scary, and it's hard to make friends sometimes. But you always have the memories of the place where you came from. So finding a book about the history of Stillwater, Minnesota, where she used to live, would be so relatable to her. Hopefully it wouldn't make her homesick, but it would be something that she could read and kind of feel nostalgic about and be like, oh, I've been there. Oh, I know where that is. That's awesome. So really being able to incorporate those things into what she likes to read. The second student profile is about a boy, Charlie. He's age 11. He loves to read comics, his favorite being Spider-Man and Batman. He will often be caught creating his own comics and drawing when he is not supposed to. His parents are divorced and he lives with his mom. He always wears the same black sweatshirt that says "Keep Calm" and Comic-Con. So some different things that I found when I was researching what Charlie might like to read, and how it could be relatable to him was Stan Lee's guide on how to draw comics. So I don't know if it was Stan Lee that actually wrote it, but it's going through and with like detailed specifics telling you how to be able to draw your own comics. That would be so relatable for Charlie. He loves to draw the comics. He loves to read comics. So it would be something that he would absolutely be interested in and really be engaged with for the reading. There's tons of books about Spider-Man, not even comic books, but actual like Spider-Man books. And so incorporating those types of things would really relate to his interests. And finally, if you're needing, like, I know a lot of schools do like accelerated reading and they have to have like points and stuff. There's a nonfiction book in the like Who Was or Who Is series, and it's Who Is Stan Lee. And that could be something that was super relatable and draws in his interests again. Another thing now that I'm just thinking of it off the top of my head, with like Stan Lee's recent death, it would be cool for maybe that kid to do a little research on that and maybe read his obituary or something like that to pull in even more types of reading. The last student profile that I included in here was a boy named Andrew at age 14. He is often in trouble and in the office. He's from the wrong side of the tracks. He doesn't seem to take much interest in anything, but does enjoy looking at different types of cars online. He can often be found with a car magazine, and he goes through and circles the ones he likes. His dad is a mechanic. So thinking about me doing the whole front loading about The Outsiders, I was thinking this would be a good book for Andrew. He seems to be kind of a troublemaker. He's on the wrong side of the tracks, and that's really what The Outsiders is kind of about, and how prejudices can like shape and kind of mold a person. Another one that I found was called The Car: History of the Automobile. So he's looking through all these different car magazines. His dad's a mechanic. It's obviously something that he's really going to be interested in and is relatable to him and is also culturally relevant. And so that would be a good nonfiction book for him. The last one that I found is actually a website. It's an Auto Week web page, and each day it features different articles, different cars. So if you're doing some kind of assignment where they have to keep up on like posts or certain websites, this would be a really good thing for him to read. There's tons of stuff. It's updating every day. It's like culturally relevant to the time. So that would be an excellent thing for Andrew to be able to read. On this slide, I have provided a link to idiotopia.org. It's about keeping learning real, relevant, and relatable. I can't click on it to go show you because it'll take me out of my slideshow, but if you have time, please click on it and check it out. A couple of points that I really liked about the article there was the idea of a dear teacher letter. And so what that would include, at the beginning of the year, to get some of you like your writing standards or something in there, have them make a dear teacher letter. Have them in that letter tell you the things that they like, tell you the things that maybe upset them, tell you a little bit about their family, so you can really get to know them through this letter, but it's also relating to your curriculum. And another thing that I thought was super great with this was create groups based on interest. They used an example of if you're like reading a book about Rome, maybe you break it into groups of who wants to learn these different things about Rome. Maybe one student wants to learn about the slaves in Rome. Maybe one student wants to learn about the different building techniques in Rome. Maybe someone wants to learn about the social classes. Something like that to kind of break it up. You're still learning what you need to, but you're really focusing in on what they think is interesting. So that is about all that I have for you. Before I let you go, though, I want to just review some of the most important things that I think you should be able to take away from this professional development. The first one is students have a hard time with learning if they cannot relate it to something that they already know. So once again, it's that idea of schema theory. If they can't connect it to something that they already have up there in their brain, it's going to be really hard for them to remember it in the future. Secondly, students don't necessarily lack the skills to read proficiency, but lack the desire to. Reading may be hard for some students, but it's going to be really hard if maybe they don't have all the skills that they need, but also that they don't really care about what they're reading. If we find something that they do care about, that can really boost them to get up to that proficiency level. Students want to enjoy what they are learning in the moment. So remember that, this might be relatable to them 10 years down the road. This might be important for them in college, but students don't necessarily care about that. I'm not saying to make all of your reading something that they want to learn in the moment, but definitely allow opportunities to bring that in to your classroom. And finally, the 3 ways to tackle making reading something that is less schoolish would be to make it culturally relevant to them. So include their beliefs, their opinions, their ideas, make reading relatable to them. So maybe they play hockey. Choose something that could be relatable to them in their hockey life. And finally, include topics that are interesting to them. If they're not interesting, they don't necessarily want to read them. Finally, this is my reference page. So if you want to know where I got any of my information, here it is. Thank you.